New York City's new police commissioner, James O'Neill, he made his first major policy address yesterday, and it wasn't just a pro forma one, at least I don't believe it was. Commissioner O'Neill acknowledged some past failings of the department, specifically in the way that it's dealt with minority communities. O'Neill said years of heavy-handed tactics, they've reduced crime. But what it has also done is opened a rift between cops and citizens, and he said the unsolved murder of a young mother in the Bronx is symptomatic of that. Jessica White. She was gunned down in the playground of a housing project she lived in, but witnesses have been so far unwilling to speak with the police, and they even tore down the wanted posters to try to find the killer. O'Neill even compared this to the Kitty Genovese murder in Queens back in 1964. That case, as many of you know, became famous or infamous when it was reported that dozens of people saw her rape and murder, but nobody did anything to stop it. Now, O'Neill addressed the way that people relate to police, saying, quote, "This is not the New York any of us wants or aspires to be. The clear message is we need every member of the public to help us. This is a shared responsibility." And O'Neill unveiled a new initiative aimed at building trust and includes naming community coordination officers, providing their email addresses, cell phone numbers to the community. NYPD saying it'll also work more closely with local community groups, churches, businesses, all in an attempt to form a more closer relationship with the neighborhoods. I've heard people say this, but the more, and I encourage people to read, the larger extent of it. He put some thought into this, I believe. Is this window dressing that the new guy always says, or do you believe there's something materially different here?
Well, time will tell, but the fundamentals of what he said is tremendous, and it could be transformative in New York City and also could be a model outside of New York City. And when you stop and think about it, when he likened it to Ms. Genovese, he's 100% right on point. We need, in order for police to be effective, they have to have good relationships with the communities. Doesn't matter what community we're talking about. You have to empower members of the community to believe in the police, to trust the police. And in order for him to be really effective here, you have to have accountability. And when you have accountability, you help the officers that go out every day and do their job properly. So I think that he really is getting off on the right foot. It's not being an apologist. It's not anti-cop. It's not anti-members of law enforcement or anyone else. It's not anti-community, but hopefully it allows you to build the bridges.
You know, when I started reading the story, and the Times did a phenomenal job about the murder of that woman with her 3-year-old son and the history of the family in that project and similar projects, it initially felt like I've read this before here, okay? Community looks at blue as the enemy, the cops go in, they got no cooperation, hits a brick wall, unsolved case, put it on the file. But then some other stuff came up, and I don't even think it was conscious that people are trying to say, forget about this one. But you compared that jogger that was killed, the daughter of a firefighter, and the attention that we all paid and the actual reward money that was issued to try and find her killer, let alone all the press and everything that was attached to it, and how long it was in the news for versus this story of a mother doing nothing wrong, but there with a 3-year-old kid, gunned down, you read about it, and then it disappeared. I could get why, if I lived there, they never fixed the lights. They never had any patrols after a certain time. And I know, I don't want to be the cop going in there at 3 in the morning, you know, doing foot patrols. I'm not trying to be a phony here. You do get why you feel, depending on your zip code, it's a completely different world.
Rich, there's no question about it, and we've talked about it several times. Look, I started at the Bronx DA's office in 1985, and I'll tell you, the relationship between the community and the police was so horrendous. It was just impossible.
And did you understand it from both sides?
I understood it from both sides because not only did I see the people in the community, I was in the complaint room listening to these cops talk. What happened in the years that followed was something similar to this. And it was transformative. It did work. It did work where cops were respecting people. They were forging relationships with people. They were forging relationships in the projects. They were around. They were paying attention. And you know something? They got the attention back. And here again, it is degenerated back into the days of old. So yes, if we don't pay attention to the community, if we don't fix the lights because we don't care, but we're only going to fix them on Park Avenue and in the nicer places, then that is what's going to happen.
He's conflating, all of what Jimmy said is completely true, but he's conflating two different things. There's no cause and effect relationship between the disparities in policing on the one hand and the stop snitching mentality that exists in the African American community. That's not unique to New York
but Mark,
or
if I
anywhere.
could, but you know what? I get it.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's a connection, and you guys jump in. To me, because of this, if I don't think anybody really cares, unless they've got the yellow tape already up here and the sheets on the ground over the body, then I'm not going to stick my neck out and testify against the drug dealer if I think that they're only going to come around then.
True. I think that's true, but to compare it to Kitty Genovese, in my view, is misguided. I get the incentive, you know, on the part of many people in the African American community to talk to police and clean up the neighborhoods, particularly older people. I get that, but there's also, and I'll get skewered for this, there's also something commendable in the stop snitching mentality. It reminds me of the old mentality among the Italian-American gangsters. And that's a value that exists in that community. You hear it in rap songs throughout,
but you know
throughout
what?
the nation,
Yeah, but
not
Mark,
just New York.
But that was different because that was about people within organized crime families snitching on each other. We're talking about citizens who observe an innocent woman. They're not in the gang. They're not. It's not snitching, it's witnessing and it's being willing to tell the police.
Neo-Soviet mentality where citizens have to inform on each other. They can or
But
they
you know
cannot.
what?
That's a choice
But how
people
else
make.
do you get justice if you can't have an eyewitness?
And I
man?
think that, again, you go back to Ms. Genovese, it wasn't a don't snitch. It was
No,
a lot
it was
of
a
it is,
different thing.
well,
That was
it's
just
all,
people
a
who
lot
didn't
of,
care.
But that's across
Indifferent,
the board,
human
though, and that's the
indifference.
same. But that, well, it's a combination. It's some of it's indifference, some of it's fear. Some of it's not necessarily fear that the police aren't going to do the right thing, but it's fear that, you know, there may be retribution against you from the people who
that's
killed
what
them.
happened in the Kitty Genovese case?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I just think it was
that-
human indifference.
No, I tend to think that if it
Sociologists
was...
study it
You know, I
like that,
interviewed
or
an
human
author
indifference.
who went back and spoke to the families years later and everything else, and it was a combination of the two. Some felt that this was
That there was some
this was a woman who
institutional
shouldn't have been out at
hostility
that
to law
time of night.
enforcement that was
Some
motivating
people
it?
were like, well, if I call, then I'll be forced to testify, and I could be under it.
Absolutely.
But the one thing that always struck me was there was a Baltimore case. You guys may remember this. In fact, Martin O'Malley, the presidential candidate, was then the mayor, or actually police chief in Baltimore before he became mayor and then governor. And this mother had the courage to testify against all these crack houses and who was doing the dealing and whatever else. Anyway, after that courage, her house got burned down, and she, along with many of her children, died in that building as a consequence of it. And it was a turning point, and certainly Baltimore is not exactly, especially that part of Baltimore, you know, some great turnaround story, but nonetheless, I could see where, thankfully, we haven't had that story here yet, but that fear of what could happen.
No question.
And,
you know,
yeah.
Rich, this also highlights another big issue. People believe, they watch shows on TV, CSI, that police go into a community, they take fingerprints, blood samples. Most street crime is solved by eyewitnesses, people that are doing the work with the police. And so when people talk about the great work that police do, they have to also talk about the great work that people in these communities do to stand up and take on situations like that. It's a brave work.
I don't think police need to be deputizing people as informers. I get the impetus to do
right,
that,
but
but taken too far, that has very dangerous
Okay, but
consequences.
beyond just the reporting of crimes, to me, Mayor, what I read in there was, when it gets dark at night, you know, winter not too late in the day and summer of different times, that's when basically cops are gone and the communities have to police themselves, right? And what an indictment if that's where we are right now, and that's where, you know, depending on your zip code, depending on where you are at this station in life, that's how you basically got to make do, lock the door and pray nobody comes through until morning, right? And to me, they have 1,300 officers that they're now new officers. And there's a bunch of different ways that you can do them, a lot of good and decent reasons. But to me, I just think it screams, this is one of them. People should be able to sleep. God knows, in New York City, without fear of what's on the other side of the door.
Absolutely. And sometimes just the mere presence of that officer is going to do the job. We've talked about it before. When you're driving on the highway, you see a police car, you tend to slow down and you drive a little bit better. You're more courteous. You don't see people on the horn and they're not tailgating. And so if you have an officer on each street, number one, you get to know who the people are to begin with. Maybe you prevent someone from getting into a life of crime, but certainly they know you're there. They know that they, no matter who they are not going to beat the entire police department, so chances are you're going to have less crime just by their presence alone.
Yeah, but to play devil's advocate, if you're a police officer, with the animosity and the hostility that exists between these two groups right now, you want to go in there in the middle of the
That
night?
animosity does not exist everywhere.
Not everywhere.
It's a myth, and it exists
No, I didn't say
primarily.
everywhere.
But
But
it
it's
exists
a hostile
primarily.
climate for police
It exists
now.
primarily in communities that have not invested, where the police have not invested in the community.
I got to hit a break here. When we come back on the other side here, interesting case in front of us. The Bush administration could be on trial. You say Bush administration. Well, the Supreme Court's deciding whether top officials, including the former Attorney General John Ashcroft, can be held liable for civil liberty violations immediately after 9/11. This one has got the attention of Washington.